Beijing has recently become quite assertive in its diplomatic posture. At the recently concluded NPC and CPPCC National Committee annual sessions, Chinese leader Xi Jinping said that China can already look at the world from a level perspective. And then at a high-level strategic dialogue between the United States and China taking place in Alaska on March the 18th, Yang Jiechi, a diplomat known for his moderate stance, not only said human rights in the U.S. were at a low point, with black Americans being slaughtered, but also said, in front of the Chinese side, the United States does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength, and, quote, this is not the way to deal with the Chinese people. Under the coordinated operations of the CCP's national media system, a nationalist fanatical show was staged in China so that Yang Jiechi's words were printed on t-shirts, cell phone cases, and other products, and they were selling well in China. In fact, the change in CCP's attitude is not recent. Since Xi Jinping took office, Beijing has been pursuing werewolf diplomacy because the CCP believes it has sufficient strength to suppress the United States in many areas, including economic and military strength. This is why Xi Jinping has started to talk about global governance and the commonwealth of human destiny. Then, what is the ultimate goal of the Chinese Communist Party? We found that Beijing's strategy could date back to 2016, the year of the former U.S. presidential election. Jin Chanrong, then considered Beijing's national advisor and a major influence on Beijing's strategy, gave a speech on China-U.S. strategy, in which he not only talked about several tactics to deal with the United States, but also laid out a comprehensive plan for the CCP to subvert the U.S. system and further become a world superpower. What is even more surprising is that many aspects of the Chinese Communist Party's strategy toward the United States today are indeed along the lines proposed in this speech. Let's study Jin Chanrong's speech in depth. He mentioned 5 strategic plans. First, to control the U.S. elections. Second, to deceive the U.S. on the South China Sea and win the strategic advantage of encircling Taiwan in the Western Pacific. Third, to actively create multiple enemies for the United States, even in the backyard of the United States. Fourth, to deeply infiltrate the U.S., thus making the U.S. internally confused and unable to watch out for China. And the last strategy is to cultivate anti-American ideology and tactics in the next generation in China so that the next generation can continue these strategies. In order to achieve these 5 strategic layouts, specific tactics are needed. For example, to control the U.S. elections, Jin suggested that the CCP should interfere in the U.S. elections and promote pro-CCP candidates to power. In particular, he said that running for a House of Representatives seat is an easy goal. He said, in fact, the U.S. House of Representatives can be controlled because the United States has 312 million people and 435 members of the House of Representatives. On average, a congressional district has about 750,000 people, with a voter turnout of only 30%. That is, about 200,000 votes can decide the fate of the congressional candidate. We in the Chinese government hope that in the end, every U.S. congressman's district will have Chinese investment, and China will be able to control 1,000 or several thousand votes, and then we can influence his attitude, referring to the congressman. If China conducts good operation in the U.S., we may be able to buy it over and turn the U.S. into our second standing committee of National People's Congress. In this case, we'll be jumping out of the Thucydides trap. Speaking of specific actions, one of Jin's proposals was to create the conditions for them to make a mistake when one day let the inspection team take him out. The conditions for them to make mistakes in Jin's claim was in fact a way of using corruption and bribery as a national competition strategy. The latter half of the sentence refers to seizing the rind of American politicians. During the 2020 United States presidential election, several media outlets exposed the relationship between Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and his relationship with CEFC China Energy Company Limited, which was developed around 2016 to 2017. The Chinese communist spy Fang Fang, aka Christine Fang, who was exposed by the U.S. media last year, had a long history of gathering political intelligence through campaign fundraising, extensive contacts, and personal charisma, and an ambiguous or sexual relationship with at least 2 Midwestern mayors between 2011 and 2015. One of Fang's targets was the young California Assemblyman Eric Swalwell. Swalwell later became a member of Congress, was appointed to the House Intelligence Committee, and served as the chief Democrat on the CIA's Oversight Subcommittee, where he was in control of some of the top U.S. secrets. Christine Fang left the United States abruptly after the FBI investigation and the revelation. Let's go back to Jin's second strategy, which is to deceive the US on the South China Sea and win a strategic advantage in the Western Pacific, including the encirclement of Taiwan. He said, "We are actively expanding our layout of national power without direct conflicts with the United States. For example, in the past few years, we have done some things such as the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Eastern Air Defense Identification Zone, the South China Sea Island Building, etc. In fact, we still try to control our paces. We're not like Russia. Russia sometimes does things directly regardless of how the US will feel. China basically still controls to what extent we do things. We built some islands in the South China Sea, which greatly irritated the United States. But we waited until the United States got itself into fights with Syria. We waited until it got itself involved in Ukraine. We only built the island then. When the US found that we had built such large islands by the end of last June, we immediately said to it, 'Oh, my dear boss, we will stop it.' The United States was very happy for a few months. They thought, after all, we are still the boss. So you see, China controls things better than Russia. But if we take the South China Sea and bring Thailand, Burma, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, the 5 bases which are called the Pearl Chain, together, we can destroy the United States Diego Garcia base in a minute. The United States will lose control of the Indian Ocean. The influence of the Middle East is gone. The United States of America's first position is gone. On the issue of Taiwan, Jin revealed some of the depth of the Chinese Communist Party's knowledge of the other side of the Taiwan Strait, including the weakness of the leaders and the possibility of unification. He said, in the case of former President Ma Ying-jeou, the Chinese Communist Party could first make unilateral concessions and then exert pressure. As for former President Chen Shui-bian, he was not strong-willed and was heavily influenced by the US, so he had to be removed using politics within the island. Incumbent Tsai Ing-wen comes from a famous family and is very sophisticated. She is the most difficult to deal with. Therefore, the Chinese Communist Party wants to accelerate the layout of the South China Sea with the goal of completing it by 2021 to form an encirclement of Taiwan. The third strategy is to actively create multiple enemies for the US, including fostering hostile countries in the US backyard. There's a problem in democratic societies, Jin said. If there is a very clear external enemy, it is easy to mobilize politically. But 2 enemies would make them confused, so as 3 and 4 enemies. Therefore, China has to keep the US having at least 4 enemies. Terrorists definitely count as one. Russia is very much like one, but not enough. China has tried to help Brazil to become one, but it is not progressive enough to be helped. This sentence revealed some of the top conspiracy of the Chinese Communist Party, including seeing terrorist groups as its collaborators to bring down the United States, and even encouraging Brazil to become an enemy of the United States. The speech happened in 2016, but what about today? The current crisis at the southern border of the United States, where millions of refugees are pouring in, how many of the Chinese Communist Party's influence opponents will be there? How much danger will this pose to the United States? In terms of creating enemies for the US, Jin also commented on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which cost the United States $6 trillion and the lives of 10,000 soldiers. He said, the US wasted a decade of time being unaware of China's development and allowed China to grow. Jin's fourth strategy is to infiltrate deeply into the US so that you have me inside you and I have you inside me, having the interests of both sides being tangled and making the US unable to take care of China without hurting its own interest. Specifically, he proposed to increase Chinese investment in the US so that both Chinese businessmen and the Communist Party officials can take advantage of the United States free market, while also hoping to attract Americans to develop their own business in China. This point coincides with a video that has been circulating recently about using the opportunity to partner with foreign investors to acquire advanced US technology and then go independent.
改革开放国门打开，让老外走进来，技术带进来，车带进来，钱带进来，经验带进来，智慧带进来。中国政府没法抄袭老外，但是中国政府干嘛？可以鼓励老百姓创业，和老外干嘛？合伙学会单干，合伙学会单干，合伙学会单干，合伙学会单干。 又光40年，学会了，我们全部单干了。最后回头一看，厂房攒了，设备攒了，技术攒了，专利攒了，产品攒了，市场攒了，品牌攒了，老外全做完了。现在，所以我们的杨外长和我们的王外长才有资格和美国在谈判的时候才那么强硬。你们是没有资格这么给我谈话的。你发现回头一看，咱40年就干2次抄袭，一路抄到世界第1排。我们是野蛮抄袭、野蛮复制，什么知识产权、什么专利技术，高再说。可是突然间回头发现2件事情出现：第一，美国发现了，不让咱抄了；第二个，咱自己也发现了，为啥？咱已经抄到第1排了，再往前抄没图纸了。咱回头想，妈的，图纸从哪来？专利从哪来呢？妈，自己要研发。这个时候，咱政府立刻提出一个，从现在开始要明白哈，但是话不能这么说呀。咱就提出个口号，叫发展才是硬道理。现在把它撕下来，换成什么？创新才是第一生产力。这政府老早，这5年前、10年前，政府都口号都喊出来，咱只是不知道而已。
Jin even suggested selling the China-owned U.S. Treasury bonds in order to create a debt crisis in the U.S. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, China currently holds nearly $1.1 trillion in the U.S. Treasuries. So how do they infiltrate the U.S.? To achieve this goal, the Chinese Communist Party has attempted to negotiate with Washington over the U.S.-China bilateral investment treaty, which allows more Chinese funds to enter the U.S. However, the BIT was shelved during the Trump presidency. The ultimate goal of allowing Chinese funds to enter the U.S. is to buy technologies. Jin Chanrong also said in the speech that if the Americans do not sell their technologies, we're not polite anymore. In the past, there was no way to use the internet, but now that we have it, of course now we have to use it. Does this refer to cyber attacks? In addition, Jin Chanrong also proposed to expel the status of the US dollar, and the internalization of renminbi must be done. This is also reflected in the recent efforts of the Chinese Communist Party to launch electronic money, the announcement of the joint venture between the Chinese Central Bank and SWIFT to establish a financial gateway company, as well as the Russian foreign minister's visit to China, in which he proposed that China and Russia could reduce the use of the US dollar. The last strategy Jin mentioned is to cultivate anti-Americanism among the next generation in China so that the next generation will try to take control of the United States as well. Jin said the 3 steps of a modern state are survival, development, and dignity, but superpowers like China and the United States actually have a 4th stage, which is to dominate the world and seek hegemony. Mao Zedong solved the problem of survival of the new China, Deng Xiaoping solved the problem of development, and now President Xi wants to solve the problem of dignity. Competing with the United States for hegemony is a set goal. This means, while the Chinese Communist Party promotes anti-American consciousness at home, it also aims to influence the young generation in the US by offering Confucius Institutes, which promote pro-communist consciousness in the guise of Chinese culture among American children. After all, the situation between China and the United States today is the result of many years of national policies on both sides. The biggest difference between China and the US is that the CCP is a centralized regime with a continuous succession of supreme power, and its next generation has been in political training for many years before taking power. In contrast, many American politicians are replaced every few years, with both parties taking turns in power, resulting in poor policy continuity and the lack of long-term planning. It is difficult for the US to have a corresponding strategy to deal with the long-term plan of the CCP. If the United States is to respond to the crisis brought about by the Chinese Communist Party, it must begin to act now. Here we would like to express our special thanks to Ms. Jennifer Zhang, who found this speech by Jin Chanrong and translated it into English. We will post a link to her translation in the description for interested viewers.